Hey everyone. So today we are going to perform the lab on Kubernetes RBAC integrated with Azure AD. I've already completed one lab on the same concept, but this one is going to be a little different. Not the concept wise, but of course, scenario wise. So let me take you through the scenario first, and then we'll start working on the lab. And I'm pretty sure you would learn something new today if you follow the lab. And I would request you, if you're following the playlist, please do it by yourself. Only then you could learn properly, else it will skip your mind. Anyways, let's get started. So what we have a Kubernetes cluster. We have integrated it with the Azure AD, and Kubernetes RBAC is enabled. I did not uncheck the box, so it is enabled by default. So these three things are done. Then what we did, we have added an admin group to the Kubernetes cluster configuration, where we have the option to add, so that I would have one of the user who can access as an admin for this lab, of course. And then what we're gonna do, this one we are going to perform everything from the CLI for a different experience, because we did everything through the portal in the previous video. But it doesn't mean we are not going to see the portal. Whatever we'll do through the CLI, we'll keep on checking on the portal as well. That's how we can relate it, and it will help us to get this information in the memory. Okay, so what we are going to do in the lab, first we'll create two Azure AD groups. We will assign these groups a role of AKS user role, so that they can log into the Kubernetes, only log in. But to do anything, they should have the permissions, roles, and how we bind it with the help of role bindings. So we'll create two users for these two groups, and we'll bind them with the different roles. And these roles are specific to the namespaces. So we'll create two namespaces as well. And these two users will have the access only on the one namespace, and we'll try to access the pod in the other namespace and vice versa. And let's see how it works. So let me share my screen and let's learn this thing today. All right. So right now, as you can see, this is the group that we have created for the previous lab on the same RBAC. We are going to use Kubernetes RBAC with Azure AD integration. And if I'll show you my Kubernetes cluster, I have the same cluster. I stop it whenever I don't work on it to save money, of course. So with the help of AKS stop, you could stop the charges as well. So this is the cluster configuration. I have only one node. That's more than enough to perform this lab. These are enabled, and this is my admin group. All right. And in the next window, I've opened this CLI. Okay. Let me clear this out, and I'll show you all those YAML files that you were seeing on the screen. So right now, first of all, what we need to do, let's grab the AKS ID that we'll use to give the permissions to the different objects, right? So I have this AKS ID. How we are grabbing the ID? With the help of AKS show resource group, the resource group of my Kubernetes and Kubernetes name. That's how we are grabbing it. And I've used these commands many times in previous videos, so it would not be strange for you guys if you're following all the playlist. Now what we need to create the Azure AD group. As I said, that's what we're gonna do. And we're gonna fetch the group ID, because we need to use that ID in the another commands while we are assigning the roles. Okay, so AD group create. This will help us to create the group. This will be the name of our group, app dev, and this would be the nickname, object ID. We are going to fetch this object ID and put it here in this variable, app dev ID. Let's do this. And then once it is created and once we have the variable ready, what we need to do, we need to assign a role to this group, and that we can easily assign with the help of AZ role assignment create. And then who will be the assignee? Assignee will be the app dev ID that will represent the group, and role would be the user role. As I said at the beginning, we need that role to log into the cluster. And the scope is AKS ID. That's what we did at the very first command that we ran. So that's how it will help us to assign role to this group. And once this is done, we'll do the same thing for the another group. This group is dev group, and the another group we are giving a name of SRE. Yeah, site reliability engineering. It's a buzzword nowadays, of course. So we're just using as in lab, nothing much. Okay, so let's go ahead and create another AD group, which will be representing as SRE, or let's put OPS, like Ops SRE in front. AZ AD group, that's all. It will create the AD group and it will assign the object ID in this variable. And once it is assigned, the same thing we are going to do again. We are going to assign the role, Azure Kubernetes Service Cluster user role, to this group as well. So it's AZ role assignment create. Give the assignee, give the role name, and give the scope. The scope is our Kubernetes cluster. You may have multiple clusters there, but here we only have one. We already have fetched the AKS ID. So let's go ahead and do it. Now we have, once it will finish assigning the role now, now we have two Azure AD groups and AKS user role assigned to both the groups. There is no user at all, only the groups. If I go here and show you Azure Active Directory, go to the groups, app dev and ops SRE, these two groups are already here. And that's what we did through the CLI. And CLI commands are sometimes comes in your certification as well, that you need to see and find out which one is correct. So that's why we need to be familiar with all that. Right now, here you can see on this group has this role on the AKS, right? And ops SRE. Very good. Now what we need to do? Well, now we need to create users, two users, and assign to these two groups. Okay, let me clear this out first, and let's echo them and put it in a variable. This will help us to put it in a variable. Now here I'm gonna give it a name, as in let's give a simple name. Let's give it app dev at Pachehra live.on microsoft.com. Okay, that's the username. Now we need to echo the password as well. It's fine, you can see my password. Let me put it as cloud at 123. Okay. Now the same thing we will do for the SRE, but before that, let's create the user first, the dev user first. Okay. And also fetch the ID for object ID for this dev user, which will help us in upcoming commands. We'll tell you. Okay. So how we create the user? It's AZ AD user. AZ AD user create display name this, and where we have already given, and this will help us to create the user. Now we have user in place. Now we need to assign AD group to this user, and here this ID will help us. Put it in this variable. Okay, now we are assigning the user this group. Now the same thing we will do for the another user, SRE user of ours. Let's give it ops SRE at, okay, on microsoft.com. Pachehra live.onmicrosoft.com. Okay. We also need the password so that we can run our command. And let's put the same simple dimple. And let's create the user. Grab the ID in the variable, repeating the same step for the SRE. And now we're going to use this ID to add this in our group, Azure AD group. Okay. And we can easily go ahead and verify if you want to, though we have not received any error. So AppDev, go to members. This is the member. If you click on that, AppDev, this is the ID that we have provided, and the same thing happened for the SRE one. Okay. Already. Cool. Now, what's the next step in this lab? We need to create 2 namespaces. Let's go one by one. Let's create the dev first. Dev is the name of our namespace. Now, what? Oh, it already exists. So that's why I said I don't worry about it. So we only need the namespace. Doesn't matter if it is already there. It is there because I was performing the lab, just summarizing myself before recording it. And if there is something that I find, I'll share it with you. This is the motive. Now we have YAML file. The YAML file that we are going to use here is devrole.yaml. Let me cat this up for you. Devrole.yaml. Now what we are doing here, we are under dev giving permissions. Okay, this role is giving permissions to the dev namespace, to whom we are binding this one, that user would have the access under dev namespace. Okay, all resources. So it doesn't matter how much is the access, but that access would be restricted to only dev namespace. So let's go ahead and create this one. Role, dev role. This will create the role, and then we need to what do we need to do? We need to bind it, okay, with the help of role binding. So let's get the, let's vim the dev role binding YAML. See what this is doing? It's binding the role, the permission that I showed you, all the permission inside the dev to this group, the dev group. And this is the ID that we need to change, because this is the ID that belongs to the previous lab that I was doing. So dev, so this would be the ID. You can also fetch it through CLI, but that is okay. What I was doing. Was the editing happening on the other machine that showed up. Okay. Now what we do, we need to do this binding. So this time we need to apply dev role binding. Configured. Very well. Now, what we need to do, we need to do the same thing for SRE group and SRE user, right? So the very first thing we need to do is create the namespace, and I'm pretty sure it will be there already because I didn't delete the old one, so that's why it's error. So don't worry, it simply says it already exists. So let me check the SRE role binding and SRE role. It's the same thing, cat SRE role dot YAML, and you'll find it's the full access on SRE namespace, right? So let's quickly run it. kubectl apply -f SRE role.yaml. Now, same thing we need to do for binding. We need to change the group ID. Here we have SRE. This would be the ID. We need to insert, remove this one, and add hours. Okay. And then we need to apply this one as well. Now, till now, we have created two groups, assigned the user role to the groups. Then we created two users, assigned each user to one of the group, to each group, dev to the dev group, SRE to the SRE group. Then we created two namespace as a dev and SRE. And then we created role, which will give permission to each namespaces and assign that role to these groups, right? And this Kubernetes RBAC is picking this from the Azure AD. That's the beauty. And when we'll try to run it and check it, it will also ask you to authenticate through the Azure AD that we already talked about in the previous videos, right? Okay, then what we need to do now, we simply need to interact with cluster now, okay? So let's go ahead and do, first clear this out, and then AKS get credentials. Resource group is kube.rg, and namespace is, name of the AKS is kube01. Yeah. Okay. Now we are here. Now we are trying to run a simple pod in the namespace dev. Okay. So we are utilizing this as kubectl run nginx dev. This is the image, Alpine image under the namespace dev. See, it will asking you to authenticate so that it could check whether you have the permission to create inside the dev namespace, any pod inside the dev namespace. That's what it's going to check it. Now we need to use to log in with the new account. What is your account? Let's try to, it was a dev, right? So let's try to use the dev user, right? Who's the member? This dev member. Let me grab the ID right here, copy it. Oh, sorry, right here. Copy it. Next. Provide the password. Sign in. Continue. And there is the prompt. Azure AD verified the credentials of this user. Now as per the permissions attached or binded to this user would be able to perform or not be able to perform the step. Okay. It is saying already exist. Okay, that means it can perform the step, or let me show you, kubectl get port namespace dev. We have this one. So we can also do kubectl delete pod nginx dev. Under the namespace dev. So we have rights, only then we could delete it. So it's deleted. Okay, and you can, if you try to create it, you would be able to create it as well. It's created. And if you can see kubectl get port, oh, we forgot the namespace. So, and you see that's beauty. It says forbidden because I'm trying to check under the namespace default, and the role which is binded to this user ID only have the access on this particular namespace dev. That's why it does not even give you anything in the default. So that's how it works. It's the beauty, and it is a very good feature for the security perspective. So dev is working fine. Let's quickly go ahead and try to run the same command, same pod, this command, but inside the namespace SRE. But before that, let me check kubectl get pod namespace SRE if there is any pod running, just to be sure. But I couldn't even check it, see, because I don't have the access. I only have the access to the dev. I couldn't even see any pod is running. If I couldn't see, how could I run any pod in the SRE if I'm logged in as a dev? Forbidden error. See, that's where the permissions mentioned. That's how it is working. That's the beauty. And let's try to get the credentials, log in through SRE, and check if it is working other way around or not. Okay, just to be sure. Let's run the credentials command again. Group is cube rg, and namespace, oh sorry, name, not the namespace, cube 01. Override, forget to mention override, so let's click yes. Now let's go ahead and simply run the SRE command. I think that would be enough. Just up arrow key SRE. Okay, now I need to authenticate myself again. I need to show who I am. Next, and meanwhile, let me grab the user member of SRE, ID of this person, SRE, this user. I need to log in with this, this one right here, another account. Now this one, this should work. Given the password, there we go, sign in, and voila, it's authenticated to the Azure AD and as per its access, and it is created. You see, it's created. I use the dev, but under the SRE, I'm logged in as an SRE engineer, right? Or a SRE user. Now, if I try to create in the dev namespace, okay, I wouldn't be able to. It should give me the forbidden error. See, forbidden. So this is the conclusion of this lab, and that's how the RBAC, Kubernetes RBAC works when with Azure AD integration. I hope this would be a learning experience for you, and thank you for watching, and let's meet in another video and we'll learn something new in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.